was just like, gosh, something's not lighting me up anymore. And my own husband, who is now retired lieutenant in the fire department, he came home one time and it stuck with me and it actually changed the trajectory of my career. He said, if they didn't pay me, I would still show up to work. And I'm like, yeah, never felt like that. I'm curious what that feels like. Tell me more.
Today, on the Servant Leadership Podcast, we welcome Tia Newcomer. Tia has led at the highest levels across consumer packaged goods, technology, healthcare, venture-backed organizations, and the nonprofit world. Her career spans leadership roles at iconic companies like Revlon, Clorox, PepsiCo, and Hewlett-Packard, where she spent nearly a decade learning what it means to lead people globally at scale. She later moved into healthcare and private equity-backed organizations before stepping into the nonprofit sector as CEO of CaringBridge. Join us as Tia talks about navigating major career transitions, leading across radically different organizational environments, dealing with imposter syndrome, building culture that actually shows up in behavior, and learn why curiosity may be one of the most underappreciated leadership disciplines today.
Tia, thank you so much for joining us on the Servant Leadership Podcast.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to be here, Chris. I'm glad you cold called me and it all worked out.
I can't believe you said yes. Reading your background was just awesome. And then I've gotten to hear you multiple times since then. Tell us your career journey, because it is an amazing career journey when people look at all the amazing Fortune 100s that you actually helped lead and work at. And we'll get into more of the recent stuff later.
Yeah, well, humbled. Thank you for labeling it as this career that's you were impressed with. I'm humbled. I will tell you there are many purposeful choices along that journey, and also I am not. I am I attribute a lot of the decisions to luck, faith, and being in the right place at the right time. So, with that as context, I started, and this is one of those things where when you look out for the people who you may not have noticed before, they are there watching you and waiting for you to not only guide you, but offer the help that you may need in that moment. And that started right out of college when I was sitting with 3 offers in front of me. I graduated with a degree in journalism and mass communications from the University of Nebraska, and advertising was my emphasis. So I had these great, again, 3 offers, but there's something, that fire in your belly you feel when you're looking at jobs or when you're working, and just wasn't feeling it. I went to my advisor and she said, Tia, I've watched you over the last, 4 years, and there's a company called Revlon coming on campus, and it's a sales position. I think you should go. And I was like, sales? What? Rest is history. I won't go into all of it, but she was the person, the first person that I can look back and say, and it was Professor Stacy James, my advisor, who really saw something that I didn't. And so that theme has continued through my career. Happened to start out at Revlon. It was a Fortune 250, I think, at that point. Amazing start. Went on to other blue chip consumer packaged goods companies like PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, Clorox, and I call that my first pillar. And the way I describe my career is around 4 pillars. The first pillar, the first stop, is this consumer packaged goods, which was just, again, amazing blue chip companies that do a phenomenal job of rotating you through different experiences around marketing, sales, and really business analysts. That was what it was called back in the day. Very many iterations since then. I think we're now into AI, which, technically, if I look back, there's a lot of that going on, but in a different fashion. So consumer packaged goods was where I started. Amazing start to my career, carrying a bag I will never regret, and has carried through my leadership up until this day to really relate back to what I'll call feet on the street. Like how the decisions that are being made at the top, how do they actually happen on the ground? So phenomenal experience. The second pillar is technology. I started, technology was hot in the early 2000s, and Hewlett Packard happened to be in my backyard. I was living in Portland, Oregon, Washington area, and I had to do a hard sell to translate the experience that I had in consumer packaged goods, but rest is history. That hard sell worked, and I actually spent almost a decade at Hewlett Packard, where I will say three things at Hewlett Packard, which were amazing and again, influence everything I do today. One, the garage where everything was invented. Dave and Bill had a philosophy called management by walking around. And that's where I learned. And I mean, I met every CEO at HP, every senior vice president, because they would literally walk around our 300,000 people across the world. They would purposely walk around the floor. And so I learned like how, again, back to that feet on the street, how do you connect? How do you really lead people? You've got to understand what's going on. So wasn't uncommon that CEO or an SVP would be coming by your cubicle and sitting down and saying, what are you working on? Oh, hi, nice to meet you. So that was influential. I think also they do a great job of rotating you through global positions. So really getting to know how different cultures work, how different the strategies that we may create in the US apply or not in other countries and other cultures. That was hugely important. And then of course you get really big businesses to run. So the playbook's created, but you can't break that playbook. So learned a lot. And then I took a pause. Actually, it was more of like you talk about really listening to what you want to do and that fire in your belly that you need to listen to. It was growling really at me at that point. I had this amazing career at HP and it was still growing and up, up, up. But I was just like, gosh, something's not lighting me up anymore. And my own husband, who is now retired lieutenant in the fire department, he came home one time and it stuck with me and it actually changed the trajectory of my career. He said, if they didn't pay me, I would still show up to work. And I'm like, yeah, never felt like that. I'm curious what that feels like. Tell me more. And so the rest is history. I did a lot of self-introspective, like listening to what I'm good at, what I like, talked to mentors, and that catapulted me into the third pillar, which was really healthcare. I started in women's health, and I've done everything from VC back to private equity in that space, and just really fun stuff where we're actually impacting lives, and that really has filled my bucket. Not only the impact and the mission behind what we were doing, but also the pace. I got to tell you, I love rocking and rolling and building things and transforming teams, cultures, and really leading and building organizations, the type of organizations I always wanted to work for. And many of them I did work for, but I wanted to take all of that and mash it up and start leading in different ways. So that, next decade was really special to be in healthcare. I then found myself with an opportunity that came across my desk that said, hey, CaringBridge CEO. And I'm like, wow, this is my moment to like actually define a culture and lead through. And at the bottom of that job description, a friend had sent it to me. It said it was a nonprofit. And I was like, oh, that's, it never really been on my radar to lead or work in a nonprofit. You have preconceived notions about what that might mean, what that might look like. So long story short, I clearly took that leap and I've been the CEO at CaringBridge over the last almost 5 years. And it's been the privilege of a lifetime. I'm getting ready to transition out and find that next impact generating position, but it's what a great mashup of taking the ability to build culture, technology, healthcare, mashing it all up and really leading forth and leading the charge at CaringBridge to help more people as they go through pretty significant health journeys.
Wow. It's such a fascinating career, and the breadth of experience is just unbelievable. When you think of what it looks like to lead at a Fortune 500, a Fortune 100, what it looks like to lead in the startup world, and then what it looks like to lead in a nonprofit, what do you feel like were some of the big takeaways on the leadership side from each of those stages? I know you talked a little bit about feet on the ground and in actually being present, but what were some other takeaways?
I'm going to go back to, so three. I'll start with the first one, which is that I'm going to label it maybe, yes, it's feet on the street, but I'm going to steal from Walmart because it also all played into this, but they call it eat what you cook. And I will tell you, they are successful year after year, decade after decade, because they have mandates and it's a culture. It's not even it doesn't feel like a mandate, but you are out experiencing what your customers are experiencing. Eat what you cook, right? We cooked up this strategy. Let's go see how it's working. Actually, at the point of where our customers are interacting with the thing that we are selling or doing. And so that has stayed with me through. So that's one learning that I still do today, right? Whether it's with our current customer care team and understanding the calls that they're, why are people calling? What are they saying? And actually listening in on those calls, to going out with sales teams to really understand what our customers want, whether that be a business customer or an actual end user, a person like all of us. So that's one learning. I think the second is culture comes from the top. And that's probably why I love being a CEO. And I think anyone can impact culture, and it has to be from the top. So I've seen it done well. I've seen it done not so well, right? Many leaders delegate culture building to a HR person or a person in their organization. And you have got to be the master of that, because culture, if you're not modeling it and if you're not walking the talk, it's not going to permeate throughout your organization. So that's second, culture at the top. The last I would say is, I alluded to it earlier, but do what lights you up. And you may think, oh, that's easier for you to say, you've been in the CEO seat. And I, even now, as I'm exploring what's next for me, I can tell in conversations or reading a job description or reading about a company that I might be interested in working with or for, I can just pay attention, right? It's like that age old adage of listen to your gut. It's there. And so I think just follow that fire and you will do good things.
Well, as you've stepped into so many new leadership roles over the years, I'm curious, you talk about feeling that in your gut. A lot of people might be listening and thinking they've been in a role that they aren't thrilled for. You talk about your husband being willing to work, doing the job without even being paid. How does somebody even go through the process to get to that point?
To find what's that fire, or rekindle or find the fire?
Yeah, like what steps could they take?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was posed with two questions that I think are really helpful. One, what are you doing when time stands still? So that feeling when you're like, oh my gosh, 2 hours just passed, right? Versus tick tock, I'm watching the clock. When am I done with fill in the blank, right? So if you pay attention to what you are doing when time stands still, notice that, write it down. Because that's the thing, that's either the job, the type of company you want to work for, the type of work you want to do, pay attention to that. So that's one. I think the second thing, I was asked by a mentor early on, I was probably late 20s maybe, and I got a phenomenal opportunity to have a car ride with our chief marketing officer at HP. And he's like, so Tia, what do you want to do? What's your career look like to you in 5 years? Where do you want to be in? So I went on this diatribe with all the positions and titles that I wanted to have. And he was listening, driving. And then he looked at me and he goes, no, like, those are all titles. What do you want to do? So it kind of ties to the first thing, like what are you doing when time stands still? But that, to me, if you can answer, what do you like to do? What do you want to do? And, surround that with, what do you want your life to look like? How do you want to balance your family with your work, with your outside interests, right? That, if you have a very clear picture, then I think your boundaries become clear, the types of companies you want to work for become clear, and the culture that you either want to create or be a part of becomes very clear. So that's how I would start with those two things.
Did you ever deal with imposter syndrome jumping from each of those pillars? Because obviously you knew you had amazing experience that most people in the world have never had. But moving from industry to industry and moving from pillar to pillar, did you ever experience that? Or were you always confident jumping into those new directions?
Oh, Chris, I'm having imposter syndrome right now. So I will tell you that it is, we don't talk about it enough as leaders, and we should. So I'm really glad you asked the question, because there is, yes, imposter syndrome all the time. And I think, you have to quiet it, right? To lead and to be decisive and all the things, but absolutely. And I think what I learned or leaned on in order to quiet that imposter syndrome is there was kind of two mantras that I would use. One, we all get nervous. I will tell you, I may show up not nervous. Everyone thinks, oh my gosh, you must, you don't get nervous about anything. You present to all these people. I'm like, every time before I am nervous. I might be nervous at the beginning always, but there's kind of a mantra in my head that I'm telling, which is be yourself, be yourself.
Mm.
And so it quiets a little bit of like, if I show up as myself, then anything I say, do, act like will be true to me. One, I'll be proud of it. I'll be able to sleep at night. But I think you just show up better, right? If so be yourself. I think the other thing to quiet imposter syndrome, which again happens all the time, is I just had to keep remembering the things that I had done. And of course, I don't know everything. So there's probably two things here is I know a lot, lean on that. I know what I'm doing. And then on the flip side, was really and has been continuously important to say what I don't know and admit it and ask for help from either my team or from board members, right? But it's okay to say I don't know. And I think that frees a lot of people to feel less imposter and honestly build a safe space for that kind of culture.
I like all of that. One of the things that makes me wonder is you had some really high standards in some of the roles you were in, probably every single role you've in, but those standards looked a little bit different when you talk through big corporate versus startup in VC-backed companies versus jumping to the nonprofit world. How did you transfer not just the skills like of your mind, but the skills of the experience, across all of those in terms of standards and expectations?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, when you think about any organization or company, there are kind of, I'll call it four things that people look at or measure, right? Whatever industry or type of business model you're in. So people, process, technology, and I purposely put culture last, but it's at the top if you're thinking about it as a pyramid. So, and I separate people and culture. This is all part of the system that creates your culture, in my opinion. So I think if you look at any industry, if you look at any job, you're going to have to be a part of and or lead change, innovation across all of four of those. So people, right? Do you have the right people in the roles? Are you coaching and developing those people? So there's so many things under there, right? But people is a really important part. Without people, you have none of the other things. Actually, it's why it's at the bottom, people, because without them, you don't have technology, you don't have processes, and you don't have culture. So people's a really important one. But again, translates, you throw out a company or you throw out an industry, it all starts with people. Process, every company organization needs process, but you can't do too much process. Otherwise you actually tie down and don't free up your people to innovate. So, but without process, you also then don't have really I say technology, but you could put anything in there that you're creating, right? Technology, products, go to market, right? So I say technology because I think technology fuels pretty much everything and anything that we do. So people, process, technology, and then culture to me it's my passion, because the culture is, I said to someone the other day, culture is what happens when no one's looking. So culture a lot of times means the posters on the wall in a company or an organization. And for me, the magic happens when those posters actually show up in behaviors across the organization, up and down. And that's when you know you truly have culture and it's supported by those other pieces.
When you jump into a new role or a new company, what are some of the first things you're looking at, especially as it relates to that pyramid? Or is it things you're looking at separate, like KPIs and goals? And what are you looking for?
Themes. So let me unpack that. Themes, because without themes, you cannot diagnose what's going on with people, what's going on with processes, technology, and culture, which all have metrics, right? You can look at the metrics, but the themes underneath that is what will tell you how to solve and or amplify anything that's going right. Solve what's going wrong, amplify what's going right. So what I have done in the last couple of roles is I do purposely skip levels through the whole organization. Um, and that include, if it's a very large organization, there is kind of a max out where I can't get to everyone in the organization, but I go pretty deep in the organization, and I have 4 standard questions that uncover themes. And I wish I would have printed those. There's something like this. What's going really well? What's not going well? If you could change one thing, what would it be? And then if you were me, what would you focus on? And it's surprising that the simplicity of those questions create themes across huge organizations to small organizations that you as a leader can look at and go, oh, okay, there's a theme that we need to go tackle that's not working today.
Wow. That's good. And I love that. That's such actionable steps for people who are listening to think through those questions as it relates to people that might work for them, or even if they're in a role, things to talk to their boss about. Really, really helpful. We talk a lot about servant leadership. When you think of servant leadership, what comes to mind, and how do you define servant leadership differently than just leadership?
Love that, because I think servant leadership is thrown around a lot, right? And I do think it's personalized and it means different things to different people. But the first word that comes to mind is curiosity. And I use that purposely because without curiosity, if you're a leader and you're not curious, thereby you are not learning or open to learning and you're just telling. So curiosity is one, open to learning, because we all learn every day, trust me, every day. 2, I think curiosity slows you down as a leader. I know the way I slow myself down is to get curious, start asking more questions than talking, because I'm learning more and it slows me down from coming up with the answer and telling. So I think that's servant leadership allows for curiosity from CEO down to your individual contributor. And allowing that curiosity from any level of the organization is really, really important. And to me, that is a key tenet of servant leadership.
I love that. When people look at your resume, they see head of this big company they've heard of, head of this big company they've heard of, leading this role, CEO of this, board member of this, and they're probably like, she has everything all together, and it must have been a very easy ride, which I know it wasn't. But what parts of leadership come hardest to you after leading in so many roles in so many different verticals over your career?
I love that question because no, it's not easy. And there are always trade-offs. I think my mom said it best when I was very young. She said, you can have it all, just not at the same time.
Mm.
So I think what comes hardest for me is I'll characterize it as speed. And what I mean by that is I can see point A to point B very clearly. And very early on, I was blessed with mentors and managers that really coached me and said, Tia, I'm with you. I see it, but I don't see it like you, 1. And 2, you are going to be leading larger and larger teams. And therefore, remember, the faster you go without really slowing down to get curious, hear different points of view, bring people along, you're going to look behind you and there's going to be no one there. And that's not leadership. And so, again, I feel very blessed that early on I had great mentors that pointed out a strength that had this blind spot. And so that I could really slow down. And so for me, action and the speed at which action happens is my hardest, speed. I'll tell you a story I had, and I love Roger. Roger is one of my, very early on, I was promoted to a manager at HP, director level, I think. And Roger had been at HP for a very long time, and he was on my team. And he was one of those very thoughtful, very quiet people. Well, I am typically not. I've learned to be more so, again, curiosity, listening, all of those things, which I worked on. And Roger, I'll never forget, we had just we just had IM functionality. I don't remember what it was. It certainly wasn't Teams, but the early days, HP, we had some IM capacity. So he's in Fort Collins, Colorado. I'm in Portland, Oregon. We have a meeting. We get off our virtual meeting. Actually, it was probably a conference call. And I hung up and he IMs me. He's like, "Hey, Turbo, can we talk?" And I was like, "Turbo?" And so I call him and I'm like, "Hey, Roger." And I go, "Turbo." And he's like, "Okay, I need to slow you down. I need you to think about this, this, and this," right? And so what he taught me in that moment in such a wonderful, fun and way was like, the people who are being the quietest often have the most important thing that you need to listen to. Now, thankfully, Roger raised his hand and said, "Turbo, slow down. I need to tell you something." And he gave me, he gave me such important information that I needed to know to guide our team and the decision at hand. But it taught me, again, back to that curiosity, slow down. That was a story that I love telling, and Roger's still out there and still connected.
I love that. And that's a great reminder for every leader, for sure. I think people are so hard charging and so excited about what's going on that sometimes the people who are in their wake feel damaged, maybe, and maybe also just aren't as on board because they just haven't been brought into it as much. I'm curious, you've gone through a lot of different transitions where you've set up people into extremely important leadership roles that followed you, filling your shoes. How do you do that well? Because you always hear about transitions going poorly.
I love that because I'm in the middle of one. I mean, transparency, honesty, but I think importantly, I'm a big fan of documentation and really sitting with someone and saying, "Okay," and it's not here's a binder, read this and call me if you have questions. That's not what I'm talking about, right? I can document everything and it doesn't matter to the person, because oftentimes I'm sure you've been in roles where you've been onboarded and you get the barrage, the proverbial drinking from the fire hose, and then 10 months later, you're like, "Oh, I kind of remember, but what was that thing?" And it was all there, but it's kind of like until you need it, you don't know. And so I think really allowing, yes, document things, but really sit through purposefully here. When this happens, remember this. When this happens, remember this, right? And kind of giving them a roadmap for when the thing happens, because giving, again, the proverbial fire hose, no one remembers all that stuff. So it's almost like giving time for the person to ingest the fire hose, but then come back and say, "Remember, when this happens, here's where you want to look, or here's the thing to look at." So, and then I'm a big fan of keeping the door open. My time, particularly, I mean, of course, at some point I'm going to be on the other end with the proverbial fire hose. But I'm a big fan of always take the call. I can always find 15 minutes, 30 minutes to lean into someone that I've done a transition with, or I mean, Chris, we kind of experienced together. If people are brave enough to reach out and they want advice, I am known to take the call, take a call, let's call it that, because I just think paying it forward, so many people paid it forward for me, and without question, that I just think that's a great way to pay it forward for others.
I love that outlook, and I've benefited from it personally, that you have that outlook. As you think through success, a lot of people are working towards many of the titles and roles that you have already achieved at the companies you've already achieved them at. And people are aspiring for that. And I know that that is extremely successful. But what else do you measure success by when you look at where you are in your career and your life, outside of just all these roles and titles that most people are working their whole lives to achieve?
What I love about this question is early on in my career, I will tell you, as I shared that example, it was more about the title. And then when I realized it had nothing to do with the title, that's where my mind shifted. And what's most important for me is, who have I impacted, truly impacted? I've been approached by people that I don't remember the conversation we had, but they do. And that's when I say, like, take the conversation, right? And so I think for me, it's, I'll call it maybe two things: leading with authenticity, right? I can only show up as me, and that
Mm.
is the only way you can show up. So anyone that's listening, like, if people are, of course, I want you to listen, and I have listened to hard feedback, right? And how, like, the blind spot that I had, right? Um, but I just think you have to show up as yourself, and then, take the feedback and mold it to the way you uniquely show up. But I think the other thing is, again, when I look at the people that I've truly impacted, that means more than anything. And I remember, we've all lost people that we have worked with to diseases or sudden accidents, and those are very tragic and hard. And I remember in one of those instances in the middle of my career, it really shook me to realize that we were a very close knit team. And when I watched who showed up at that funeral memorial service, and this gentleman was hugely impactful to many people's lives behind the scenes quietly. And that's when I think about his life well lived and going to that memorial service, I was like, that's what I want to be. No one knew all these lives that he had impacted quietly behind the scenes. And to me, that's what matters, honestly, the most. Not the titles, but if I had just sat at a director level and impacted, hundreds of lives, that I think is the measure of a good run.
Mm. As people are listening to that, I think that for sure they'll agree with it. Any tips on next steps to start being a person that lives a better life of impact?
Yeah. Don't forget your families first. Whatever your family looks like, families first. And I often tell my husband and I talk about it. I have two daughters. There were many times early that I rearranged my family life because of something urgent at work. And to this day, I can tell you what I missed at my family, but I cannot tell you what that urgent thing at work was. So just keep
Mm.
that in mind. And again, there are urgent times. I'm a big fan of accountability, and I move with speed and all the things. So don't get me wrong. And you can create boundaries, and you should. Family first. So that's one. I think the other, I'll go back to my take the call. Really, well, let me expand on that, because not everyone is having people call them and saying, "Hey, I want your advice on this." But if you are a leader, or if you're a peer to someone, truly take the time, I would say, to listen. And I think about all the times you're interacting with your work mates, or your people that may report to you. Like, get to know them on both a personal and a professional level. One of the ways I've done that, because I have a propensity, I will share with you guys, like, I want to dive in, let's get this done, like, let's dive into the agenda and go. So back to that theme of, like, slowing myself down, I'll start one-on-ones purposely with, like, personal and business best. This is not new, this is out there in many books, but that slows me down to really understand, what is that person bringing into the room, whether it's our one-on-one, a big meeting. Everyone's walking in with something that we cannot see, something that happened that morning, something that's going on in their lives. Like, not that you may find out all of that, but at least you can do a check-in of, like, what's going on outside of the four walls that we are sitting in or collaborating in from a work perspective. And I think that's really important.
Mm. Well, it's so interesting because you talk about going fast, right? As that's some of who you are, and then how you've learned to go slow and care for people, at a whole different level. What would you just say to somebody that hears that, like, go slow and actually care about people and things? That's just soft leadership. That's what we shouldn't waste time doing that. That doesn't matter as much as whatever X, Y, Z objective. How do you help people, and maybe even you've led people like that, how do you help them realize what's really important?
That will only last so long. Like, it will always at some point fail you, right? How many times have the best leaders in your organization, your top performers, left? And when you ask them why, it's not because they're not making good money. It's not because they're right. They may say, "Oh, I'm making more money. I got an offer that's better here." But when you really dive deeper, it's really usually a conflict with who they're working with or for. And so again, I learned that early on. HP was phenomenal. I think they were one of the first adopters of the Gallup Strength Finder and really focus on strengths and how do you manage people better to focus on that. So I do think that, I just think that's the way I would lean in a little bit more.
I love that. As you're thinking through now, transitioning and what's next, there might be people listening who are thinking through, I'm in a season of transition. What are some of the tips you would give people in trying to figure out the next thing?
Yeah, I've done a lot of this purposeful pause, I call it, the in between. And again, I feel blessed that I can do that. But even if you need a job like next week, take the time to really think about what is your value proposition. And that extends across two things. Your value proposition that you bring to a company or organization, right? What are you really good at? Get really crisp at it. Almost like you're pitching yourself, right? There's tenants in there. But also, what are your values? So there's value proposition to the organization or company that you're going to, but what are your values? I've done fun things. For example, you can search up online, what's my spirit animal? And you take this little quiz, because I love stuff like that. And then it tells you what your spirit animal is, but it gives you a lot of reflects back the values that you bring to the table and that are important to you. And so the value proposition helps you sell yourself. The values helps you anchor in what kind of company do I want to work for, and making sure that you stay true to that as you go through the next interview process or seeking that next role.
Wow. That's so good. And I think a lot of people are going to be trying to figure out their spirit animal after this too now. I want to hit you with 10 rapid fire questions before we close out, where you just say the first thing that comes to mind and there's no right or wrong answer.
Uh-oh. This is going to be fun. Okay.
First question. Who's the first person you think of when I say servant leadership?
Jeff Cross, my old CEO.
Love that. 5 words that most describe you.
I'm counting because I have this saying in my head. Okay, I'm going to say the saying, what you do today is important because you exchange a day of your life for it.
Wow, that's deep and good. Favorite book or author?
Seth Godin, Linchpin. That changed my life 2 decades ago.
Favorite food?
Dungeness crab from Oregon coast.
Oh, all right. Favorite thing to do in your free time?
Oh gosh, so many things, but I love walking my white lab, Luna. No podcast, no headphones. The pure joy of watching a dog in their off leash is grounding for me.
Love that. Surprising fact about you?
Surprising. I am a daughter of a first generation immigrant from Latvia.
Wow. All right. Favorite place you've been?
Interlaken, Switzerland.
Is there anywhere in the world that you want to go that you have not been?
Oh my gosh, so many places. I would say top of the list is, this is a tough one. Turkey.
Oh yeah. All right. Best advice you've ever received?
From my mom, back to the top of this conversation, you can have it all, just not at the same time.
So good. And finally, we talk a lot about servant leadership, and a lot of people listen to the podcast because they're trying to learn about servant leadership. Why do you think they should care about this?
Because it is the only thing that will make your organization thrive in chaos or tough times.
Wow. Well, Tia, thank you for sharing some of your story and a lot of wisdom. I'm excited for people to get to hear from you and follow the stuff you do next.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity and conversation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Servant Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an update. Be sure to check out the servantleadershippodcast.org for more updates and additional bonus content.